It had been 10 years since Hank Morton buried his past. 10 years since his first wife, Linda Walsh, fell overboard during a weekend yacht trip off the coast of Washington. 10 years since the Coast Guard called off the search. 10 years since he stood in front of friends and family, eyes dry but voice trembling, and said goodbye. The obituary described it as a tragic accident. But in private, Hank called it something else. A clean break. Now at 58, Hank was one of the most respected attorneys in Seattle. He had a beautiful younger wife, a daughter in med school, and a home overlooking Puget Sound that screamed money, power, and peace. Peace until the night she showed up. The annual Morton Foundation Gala was held at the Fairmont, as always. Crystal chandeliers, vintage jazz, and a silent auction that raked in 6 figures before dessert. Hank stood on stage, charming donors, praising veterans, making eye contact like a man with nothing to hide. And then he saw her. At first, just a shadow near the back of the ballroom. Older than he remembered, silver streaks in her hair. But when their eyes met, the glass in his hand nearly slipped. She was staring at him, not like a stranger, but like someone who knew. He stepped down from the stage, trying to shake the chill crawling up his spine. She was walking toward him now. Slow, steady, unblinking. No one else seemed to notice. The music played on. Champagne clinked. But for Hank, the room shrank to just him and her. And then she said it. Soft, almost playful like an inside joke. "You buried me too early, Hank." He froze. The voice. The cadence. The smirk. It was her. Or someone who knew exactly how to be her. He stared, his mouth dry. "Linda," he whispered. But she was already gone, vanishing into the crowd like smoke. That night, Hank didn't go home. He drove around for hours, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Or what he thought he'd seen. Linda had died. He was sure of it. He remembered that night on the boat in 2012 like a nightmare replaying in high definition. The storm. The argument. The look in her eyes right before he pushed her. There was no way she survived. Unless someone found her. Someone helped her. Someone brought her back. Or worse, she never died at all. At 2:14 a.m., Hank finally pulled into the driveway of his home. He opened his mailbox out of habit. Junk mail, a real estate flyer, and a small padded envelope. No return address. Inside, a cork from a 2007 bottle of Napa Valley red wine, and a note, handwritten, in cursive only Linda used. "Still remember the night you proposed. I kept the cork. Thought you might want it back." Hank's hands began to shake, because only she would know that. The next morning, Hank Morton sat in his study, staring at the cork on his desk like it might explode. It wasn't just any cork. It was the cork from a night he proposed to Linda in 2007. A bottle of Cabernet he couldn't afford back then. They had toasted to forever. And now, 10 years after her death, that cork had come back with her handwriting on it. He didn't tell Deborah, his wife of 6 years. She'd only ask questions he didn't want to answer. Instead, he called his assistant and canceled all appointments for the day. He needed time to think, time to figure out whether he was being stalked, blackmailed, or haunted. He poured himself a drink, but his hands were shaking too hard to hold the glass. That's when the phone rang. No caller ID. He hesitated, then answered. "Do you remember what I was wearing the night of the storm?" The voice was unmistakable. Calm. Cold. Linda's voice. "You said blue made me look soft. But you hated soft, didn't you, Hank?" His blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" he demanded. But she'd already hung up. By the afternoon, it got worse. His daughter, Emily, 24, called him from the hospital where she was doing her residency. "Dad, something really weird happened today." "What is it, honey?" "A woman came in, asked for me by name. Said her name was Grace Kingston. But, Dad, she looked just like Mom." Hank froze. She knew everything. "My favorite stuffed animal. The name of the puppy we had when I was 8. She even quoted that dumb song we used to sing on road trips. How would anyone know that? What did she want? She didn't ask for anything. She just said, "Tell your father I said hello. He'll know who I am." Then she walked out. Emily's voice cracked. "Dad, is she alive?" "No," Hank said quickly. "No, she's not. That woman is lying to you. Don't trust her." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it himself. That night, Hank sat in his living room with the curtains drawn shut and every light off. He flipped through the old photo albums he'd stashed away years ago, him and Linda. Birthdays, vacations, moments he tried to forget. And then came a next blow. His phone buzzed. A new message. No contact name, just a photo. A photo of him and Linda in 2011, in their bedroom. A private photo, one he didn't even remember being taken. Then another, a photo of Linda today, walking near the Seattle waterfront. Gray scarf, same green eyes, a little older, but very much alive. The final message simply read, "I never drowned. You just stopped looking." Hank stood up so fast, he knocked over his drink. She was back. Not just in his head, not just in rumors. She was here, in his city, in his daughter's life. The only question now was, what did she want? To the world, Linda Walsh died on a windy September night in 2012. A boating accident, they said. A tragic mishap during a weekend getaway. The Coast Guard searched the waters off the Olympic Peninsula for 3 days. No body, no life vest, nothing. Eventually, the case was closed. Death by misadventure. But the truth? That night wasn't an accident. It was an execution. September 22nd, 2012. Hank had rented a sleek, 42-foot yacht called the Red Ember for the weekend. Just the two of them. A romantic reset. Or at least that's what he told Linda. But behind the charm, behind the wine and the seafood platter he picked up on the way, Hank was boiling. Linda had discovered the offshore accounts. She had gone digging, found documents linking Hank to bribery, shell companies, and a falsified court settlement involving one of his wealthiest clients. Worse, she had confronted him, threatened to go to the authorities, said the words he couldn't unhear. "You either confess by Monday, or I will." That night on the boat, the waves were rough. The sky was blackening with storm clouds. Linda stood on the back deck, staring at the horizon, arms crossed, wind tangling her hair. Hank brought her a glass of wine. "Let's talk," he said. "Just you and me. No threats." She didn't turn around. "You always want to talk when you're cornered. I'm your husband. You stopped being that when you started laundering money." The argument escalated. Voices rose over the crashing waves. Linda turned to go inside, said she was done. And that's when Hank grabbed her wrist. Just for a second. Just long enough. She slipped, half fell, half pushed against the railing. Her hands gripped the slick metal. Her feet slid. And then she was gone. Hank stood there for a few seconds, staring at the spot where she vanished. He didn't shout for help. He didn't throw a buoy. He just waited until the storm rolled in harder, until the sea covered his mistake. Back on shore the next morning, he made the call. His voice sounded broken, believable. "She fell. I tried. I couldn't reach her." The authorities asked a few questions, reviewed the radar logs, noted the bad weather. There was no surveillance, no witnesses, no motive, at least none they could see, no body. Case closed. But long before Linda hit the water, long before the lies and the silence and the ghosting of a name, there were signs. At first, Hank was the dream. Smart, charming, brilliant in the courtroom and magnetic at dinner parties. He swept Linda off her feet in 6 months, proposed in 9, married before their first anniversary. They were golden, or at least they looked it. But somewhere around year 3, the gold began to tarnish. Hank started staying late at the office. He traveled more. He flinched at Linda's questions, rolled his eyes when she brought up the mortgage, the taxes, the missing funds from a charity event he once organized. And then came the little lies. It's just a business dinner. I didn't see that call from you. You're imagining things, Linda. At first, Linda believed him. She wanted to, but she was no fool. Linda had worked as an office administrator at a mid-sized law firm before marrying Hank. She knew how paper trails worked. She knew how accounts could be hidden behind other accounts. One afternoon in 2011, while Hank was away at a conference in Chicago, Linda opened his locked file cabinet in the basement. The key was taped under the fire extinguisher. Old trick. She found statements. Offshore activity. Wire transfers to places with no names, just numbers. She didn't confront him. Not yet. She copied everything. Printed duplicates. Stored them in a safety deposit box under her maiden name. And then she waited. That same fall, she noticed something else. Hank had become colder. Not just distracted, dismissive. Anytime she brought up something personal, something that mattered, he shut it down. Can we not do this now? You always ruin a good evening. Maybe you should stop playing detective in your own house. Linda wasn't trying to ruin anything. She was trying to understand who this man had become. Because the man who held her on their honeymoon wasn't the one who now stared through her like she was furniture. She started sleeping in the guest room. They went days without speaking. Even their dog, an old golden retriever named Bailey, started reacting to Hank differently. The tail stopped wagging. The ears flattened. Sometimes animals know before people do. On the night before the yacht trip, Linda stood at the kitchen sink watching Hank pour himself a drink. "Let's go away this weekend," he said. She didn't turn around. "Why now?" "Because we need it. Because I miss you." But his voice didn't sound like longing. It sounded like strategy. Linda hesitated, then nodded. She didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. Not because she agreed to go, but because she already knew she might not come back. 3 months later, Hank moved into a new house. 6 months later, he started seeing Deborah. By year 2, he was back to hosting galas, playing golf with judges, smiling for cameras. The world moved on, and Hank Morton forgot, or tried to, until the messages started, until her voice called him again. And now, in his darkest moments, when he stood in the quiet of his study, he wondered if that night in 2012 had really ended anything at all. Because now, she wasn't a memory. She was a ghost with unfinished business. The sea didn't kill her. The cold tried. The salt water stung her eyes, scraped her throat, and pulled her under again and again. But Linda Walsh didn't die. She held on. First to hope, then to rage, and finally to a splintered crate that drifted past her in the dark. That floating piece of debris became her salvation. She clung to it for hours, body bruised, lungs burning, mind fading. And then a light. Faint, yellow, distant. It was a commercial trawler, a fishing vessel out of Port Angeles. They pulled her in barely conscious, lips blue, fingers curled into claws. They found her barely breathing. Soaked, silent, ice cold to the touch. No ID, no name, no explanation. The fishermen radioed the Coast Guard, who advised them to head straight for a dock in Port Angeles, where an ambulance would be waiting. She was unconscious when they transferred her. Heart rate irregular. Breathing shallow. A nurse on duty later said, "We thought she wouldn't last the night." But she did. She lasted the night. And the next one. And the next. It took Linda 3 days to open her eyes. It took another 4 before she could speak. And when the nurses finally asked her name, she lied. "Grace," she whispered. "Grace what?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, because saying Linda Walsh meant questions. Police. Records. Cameras. And Hank would find her. She wasn't ready. So she became Grace, a woman with no past, no papers, and no memory anyone could verify. Her body healed faster than her mind. Every muscle ached. Her skin peeled in places from salt exposure. But the worst was inside. She'd jolt awake at night, gasping for air, clawing at invisible water. She dreamed of the ocean swallowing her whole. Worse, she dreamed of Hank's hands, his face, the way he didn't even shout her name when she fell. At first, she convinced herself it had been an accident. Maybe he panicked. Maybe he froze. Maybe she imagined it all. But the more the nightmares came, the more one detail anchored itself in her mind. He didn't look shocked. He looked relieved. 3 weeks after being discharged into a halfway home for trauma patients, she sat in the common room, flipping through a newspaper. And there he was, Hank Morton, on the front page of the Seattle Journal's profiles in leadership, smiling, confident, standing beside city officials at a groundbreaking ceremony for a new courthouse wing, funded by the Morton Foundation. The caption read, "Widowed in a tragic boating accident, attorney Hank Morton has become a beacon of strength and second chances." She dropped the paper. Her hands began to shake. And in that moment, it all came back. The deck, the storm, the look in his eyes. He did this. She packed that night, left the group home before sunrise, used the last bit of money from her hospital social worker's voucher to rent a basement room from an old widow who asked no questions. For the next 2 years, she stayed hidden. She worked as a cleaner under the name Grace Kingston, chosen from a billboard she once saw on a bus stop ad. No IDs, no taxes, cash only. She moved often, never stayed more than 6 months in one city. But each night, she wrote. She filled notebooks with names, dates, details, memories of Hank, of Emily, of that night. And slowly a new thought grew. If I survive that, I can do anything. In 2015, she took a chance. Enrolled in night classes under a fake name. Computer basics, then data handling, then cyber research. She didn't care about degrees. She cared about access. By 2017, she knew how to search property records, how to use public databases, how to scrub her online activity clean after every login. She learned to become a ghost, one with a plan, one who would one day step into the light and make him pay. "We thought she was dead," the captain later told police. Hell, she almost was. But when they asked for her name, she whispered, "Don't tell anyone." At the regional hospital, Linda gave a fake name, Grace Kingston. She claimed she was hiking alone and fell from a cliff into the bay. No ID, no family, no record, just a quiet, broken woman who wanted to disappear. And for the next 8 months, she did exactly that. Her body healed slowly, ribs mended, bruises faded. But her mind sharpened. She watched the news from her hospital bed. And there he was, Hank Morton, speaking at a veterans fundraiser, holding hands with a young woman, smiling, respected, admired. Husband of the late Linda Walsh, the anchor said. A tragic accident at sea in 2012. That's when Linda knew what she had to do. She couldn't go to the police. There was no hard evidence. No one saw the push. No one heard the fight. And worst of all, she was legally dead. So she stayed dead. But she didn't stay silent. She rented a room under the name Grace Kingston in Spokane. Took a job cleaning offices at night. She saved every dollar. Learned computers at the public library. Watched YouTube videos on document retrieval, offshore banking, public records, video editing. For 5 years, she built a new identity. Then she went back. To Seattle. To the shadows. To him. Grace Kingston didn't exist before 2013, but she was everywhere by 2019. She worked as a part-time tech assistant at a nonprofit near Hank's law firm. She joined online support groups for widows. She made casual connections with Hank's former secretary, his housekeeper, even the bartender at his golf club. Every connection gave her a piece of the puzzle. Where Hank kept his backups, which laptop he used late at night, what passwords he repeated out of old habits. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was building a case. The jackpot came from the past. A hard drive recovered from the yacht rental company that stored maintenance and security logs. Linda found it at an auction, hidden in a box marked obsolete equipment. And on that drive, grainy video footage from the Red Ember. Date stamped, September 22nd, 2012. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. You could see the shadows, the fight, the way Hank grabbed her arm, the moment she fell. Not a clear image, but not a total blur either. Enough for doubt. Enough to rattle him. In 2022, 10 years after he tried to kill her, Linda stepped out of the dark. Not to beg for closure. Not to ruin him overnight. But to make him doubt everything. His memory. His version of his story. His sanity. And she would do it slowly. One cork. One phone call. One conversation with his daughter. Because sometimes justice isn't swift. It's psychological warfare. And she had 10 years worth of pain to sharpen every blow. It started with the phone calls. Every few nights, the landline in Hank Morton's study would ring once, just once. No voice, no background noise, only silence. Then came the emails. From anonymous accounts with subject lines like, "You still remember the sound I made when I hit the water? Emily deserves to know the truth." Attachments followed. Old photos. Scanned copies of wire transfers Hank thought were long buried. A grainy clip showing a woman falling backward off the deck of the Red Ember. Every message left a deeper crack in his carefully constructed reality. His daughter, Emily, called less and less. And when she did, her voice was cold. "You lied to me," she said one night. "About everything." "I didn't lie, Hank tried. You were a child. You didn't need to carry that weight. You said Mom died in a storm. You held a memorial. But I saw her. I talked to her. She knew things about me that no stranger could ever know." He could feel her slipping away like Linda had 10 years before. "She's not crazy, Dad," Emily whispered. "But I think you might be." Linda hadn't expected Emily to call. She certainly hadn't expected her to agree to meet in person. But 2 days later, there they were. A small corner booth in an old cafe on the east side of Seattle. Rain tapped gently against the windows. The smell of black coffee filled the space. Emily was already sitting when Linda walked in. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her phone, sipping water she hadn't touched in 10 minutes. When she looked up and saw Linda, she froze. Linda stopped a few feet from the table. She didn't smile, didn't reach out. She simply said, "Hi." Emily blinked fast, then nodded. "Hi, Grace." Linda sat across from her. They stared at each other in silence. One woman with 1,000 things to say. One girl with 1,000 questions she didn't know how to ask. "I don't know where to start," Emily admitted. "Wherever you want," Linda. "If you're not her," Emily said, "then you're the best liar I've ever met." Linda looked down. "I'm not lying. I'm not pretending." "Then prove it." Linda nodded. She reached into her coat and pulled out a faded photograph, creased at the corners, soft from years of handling. A picture of Emily as a toddler, sitting in a sandbox. A tiny stuffed duck clutched in her lap. "That duck," Linda whispered, "was named Ollie. You chewed the tail until it unraveled. When I tried to sew it back on, you cried for 3 hours because you thought I hurt him." Emily's lips parted. Her eyes filled just slightly. Then Linda added, "You had asthma until you were 6. Your favorite color used to be green until you saw a blue jellyfish at the aquarium. You changed it that night. Said blue was magic." Emily stared down at her hands. "Why didn't you come back?" Linda hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she had too many. "I wanted to," she said. "I tried, but I was broken. Physically, mentally. And I knew if I came back without proof, he'd find a way to bury me again. You were just a child, Emmy. I couldn't risk dragging you into it. So you stayed dead. I stayed safe. So you could be safe. A tear fell down Emily's cheek. I used to dream about you, she said. Not big dreams, just stupid little ones. You walking into my classroom on parent day. You brushing my hair. You singing that awful lullaby with the raccoon in it. Rocky the Raccoon, Linda whispered. Emily laughed, just once, just briefly. God, it was terrible. It was ours. You know what's the worst part? Emily said, Tell me. I don't know how to be mad at you. Linda looked stunned. You can be. You have every right. But I'm not. I'm angry at him. I'm angry that he erased you from my life and made me think I had to forget you to survive. But you came back, and you remembered me. Linda reached across the table, slowly, cautiously. Emily didn't pull away. She let her mother hold her hand for the first time in over a decade. It was warm, real, not a ghost, not a lie. They didn't solve everything that day. They didn't hug and cry and tie the past into a neat little bow. But when they left the cafe, Emily turned and said, Would you maybe want to meet again? Linda smiled. I'd love nothing more. Sleep became a stranger to Hank. He tried to shut it all out. The ghost calls, the cryptic messages, the eyes of his daughter looking at him like he was something rotten inside. He took Ambien, switched to Scotch. He even tried meditating once, at Deborah's suggestion. It only made things worse, because every time he closed his eyes, she was there. Linda, not the Linda from their wedding photos. The other one, the one soaking wet. Hair stringy, skin blue, lips whispering. I remember the look on your face when I fell. At first, it was dreams, but then he started seeing her when he was awake. In the rearview mirror, in the hallway of his office, standing in the crowd during a press interview. Always still, always staring. Once, during a conference call, he swore he saw her reflection in the window behind him. He turned so hard, he nearly broke his chair. There was nothing, but his assistant watched him with wide eyes. Mr. Morton, are you okay? He stopped showing up at the firm, said he was taking a personal retreat, said Deborah was sick, said anything he could to stay inside the fortress of his home. But the walls didn't help, because the whispers were in the walls now. His own voice, replayed in slurred half-confessions. I should have pushed harder. She never screamed. She just sank. He unplugged his security system, ripped his computer from the wall, smashed his cell phone with a hammer after he got a text that simply said, I'm colder than I remember. He stopped shaving, stopped eating, started watching the front door like a man waiting for the devil. One night, he swore he saw her, on the lawn, standing in the rain, in the exact dress she wore the night she died. He didn't run out to check, didn't even call the cops. He just sat there, staring, until the image melted into mist. He tried to make sense of it. It's not her, he whispered to himself in the bathroom mirror. Someone's messing with me. A hacker, an actress, a trick. But the reflection didn't believe him. His face looked gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, his voice foreign. And worst of all, for the first time in years, he didn't sound like a man with answers. He sounded like a man who knew the end was near. Deborah had always known something wasn't right with Hank. Not from the start, of course. When they first met, he was polished, magnetic, the grieving widower who still wore his wedding band on his right hand out of respect. She thought he was noble, tragic even, the kind of man who needed saving. But now, after nearly 9 years of marriage, the illusion was cracking. He didn't sleep. He muttered to himself. He paced the hallway late at night in his robe, staring through the blinds as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. And worst of all, he looked afraid. At first, she tried to be understanding. Is it work? Is it Emily? Hank would shake his head, snap at her, then apologize with hollow eyes. He'd always been private, but now he was secretive. He changed passwords, locked drawers, shoved folders into his briefcase if she walked into the room. And then came the boxes. 3 of them, shoved into the attic. She wasn't supposed to look. But one night, while Hank was out taking a drive, Deborah went up there with a flashlight. Inside the first box were newspaper clippings about Linda Walsh, the accident, the failed search, the obituaries. In the second box, letters, handwritten, not addressed, not mailed. Some looked like love letters, others like apologies, all signed with the same name, Linda. Deborah sat on the floor of the attic for almost an hour, reading in silence, hands trembling, mouth dry. She wasn't just the second wife. She was the decoy. He had never let Linda go. Or maybe he had never told the truth about losing her. When she heard Hank's car pull into the driveway, she shoved everything back and crept down like nothing happened. But something had broken inside her, between them. And the next morning, when she watched him talking to himself in the bathroom mirror, whispering about the water and her eyes and the night on the boat, she knew she couldn't stay. She waited until dinner, sat across from him at their too-long table. He barely touched his food. "I know," she said. He looked up slowly. "Know what?" "That she's back." He blinked, hard, then tried to laugh, but it came out as a croak. "Deb, don't start. I saw the pictures, the letters, the videos. I know something's wrong, Hank. I just don't know if it's her or you I should be afraid of." He didn't answer. "I'm leaving tomorrow. I've already booked the flight." Still no response. "If you want to fix whatever this is," she said softly, "don't call me. Call the truth." She got up. He stayed seated. She never saw him again. Deborah, Hank's wife, found a flash drive taped under his desk. She watched the video at 2 a.m. in their kitchen, alone. No music, no dramatic score, just cold, digital truth. It showed Hank drunk in his study, muttering to himself. She should have gone under faster. Damn cold water kept her floating. Should have made sure. Should have tied something to her. His voice, his face, his guilt. The next morning, Deborah packed a suitcase and walked out without a word. Hank didn't try to stop her. He couldn't even stand. That evening, Hank sat in his study, curtains drawn tight, bourbon bottle half empty. Linda was everywhere. She was in the news, an anonymous source leaking tax fraud allegations linked to his firm. She was in his voicemail, laughing, taunting. She was in his dreams, standing at the end of his bed, wet hair, hollow eyes. And finally, she was at his door. She didn't knock, just appeared. Same eyes, same scar on her cheekbone. Older, colder, and very much alive. "You look tired, Hank," she said calmly. He stumbled backward, like he'd seen a ghost. "You're not real. Tell that to your daughter. Tell that to your bank accounts. Tell it to your conscience. What do you want from me?" "A confession." He snapped, screamed, threw the bourbon glass across the room, pulled open the drawer, and took out the gun. He raised it, hands shaking. "You want justice?" he growled. "This is what justice looks like." He pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The lights in the room turned on. All at once. Behind the curtains, behind the bookshelf, inside the vents. Cameras. Tiny, blinking quiet. And then a voice from the hallway. "Drop the weapon, Mr. Morton." Detective Tom Brown stepped forward, badge raised. "We've got it all." Linda stepped to the center of the room, eyes on Hank as he sank to the floor. "You bury me once," she said, "but you can't bury the truth." The detective snapped on the cuffs. "Henry Morton, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Linda Walsh and obstruction of justice." And as Hank was dragged from the house, broken, humiliated, and fully exposed, Linda didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, still and silent, like someone who had just finished digging herself out of a grave. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the aisles. Court sketch artists hunched over their pads. The buzz outside was deafening. Inside, it was dead quiet, except for the sound of a chair being pulled back as Linda Walsh took the witness stand. 12 years after she was declared dead, she faced the man who tried to kill her. Hank Morton, now 58, now a prisoner, now nothing like the charming lawyer with perfect hair and press-ready smiles. He looked defeated, but Linda? She looked alive. For the first time in over a decade, she spoke calmly, steadily. In 2012, I confronted my husband about financial crimes I discovered within his firm. He invited me on a weekend yacht trip. I thought we were going to talk. Instead, he pushed me into the sea. There was a sharp gasp from the gallery. She continued. I survived. Barely. I spent months recovering, years hiding. I watched him move on, build a new life, become a local hero, while I lived under a fake name in the shadows, trying to stay invisible. I came back not to destroy him, but to make him face what he did. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. We find the defendant, Henry Thomas Morton, guilty on all charges. The judge nodded solemnly. But before he could speak, Hank's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client requests the opportunity to address the court. The room hushed again. People expected silence, or maybe shame. But Hank Morton stood tall, his suit wrinkled, his hair grayer, but still clinging to that performance-ready mask he'd worn for decades. He looked straight at the jury, then at Linda. You want me to say I'm sorry, he began. You want me to break down and admit I'm some monster who planned everything from the start. He shook his head, but that's not what happened. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. Linda was unstable, Hank continued. She was angry. She had issues, emotional, paranoid. That trip was supposed to save our marriage. I didn't push her. She slipped. I panicked. I didn't call for help because I froze. I regret it every single day, but it wasn't murder. His voice cracked just enough to sound believable. Some people looked moved. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, with permission, Ms. Walsh would like to offer a rebuttal. The judge paused, then nodded. Linda stood slowly. She didn't speak from the podium. She walked closer, just a few feet from where Hank stood, now in handcuffs. She met his eyes and held them. He says I was unstable, she said, voice steady. But I was the one holding our marriage together. He says I slipped, but he waited. He watched, and he didn't lift a hand. She paused. This man didn't panic. He calculated. He watched the waves take me and saw a future without consequences. And he almost got it. But I didn't die. And now, I'm not afraid of him anymore. She turned to the judge. I don't want revenge. I want the truth to be what's remembered, not his version. She turned back to Hank one last time. You buried me in silence, but I dug my way out with memory. And now, I get to live again. The courtroom stood still. Even Hank lowered his eyes. Not in guilt, in defeat. The judge spoke next. Mr. Morton, this court finds your actions deliberate, cruel, and remorseless. The law does not take kindly to cowards who silence their victims. You were sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. As the gavel fell and the sentence echoed through the courtroom, Hank Morton blinked once. Not in surprise, not in shame, but in something close to peace. No one knew what went through his mind in that moment. But somewhere deep in the back of his head, a door creaked open, and behind it, a memory he hadn't touched in 40 years. He was 9, living in a house too quiet and too clean. His father was a judge, cold, measured, ruthless in court, and worse at home. His mother? A woman of perfect posture and powder-scented silences. No one yelled in the Morton household. They didn't need to. Disappointment had its own volume. Punishment came in the form of cold dinners, locked bedroom doors, and week-long silences. One Sunday afternoon, Hank, then Henry, forgot to take off his shoes before stepping on the Persian rug in the living room. His father didn't raise his voice. He didn't slap him. He simply looked at the rug, then at Hank, then walked out. The next day, Hank's birthday party was canceled. Actions have consequences, his father said over breakfast. That night, Hank cried quietly into his pillow. It was the first time he realized love in his house was a transaction, and every mistake had a price. By high school, he had learned to smile at the right people, nod at the right moments, mirror the right emotions. He dated girls with ambition, not feelings. He joined clubs for strategy, not belonging. He became a man built for performance. And when he met Linda years later, she was warm and curious and unpredictable. He loved her the way a man loves fire, from just far enough to feel its heat, but never close enough to get burned, until she asked for more. More openness, more truth, more of him. And that was when the switch flipped. Standing there in the courtroom now, cuffed and condemned, Hank didn't think about boats or flash drives or verdicts. He thought about that boy, the one who was taught that control equals love, that if someone made you feel vulnerable, you had to make them disappear. He wondered, very faintly, if it could have been different, if someone had hugged him when he cried, if someone had told him silence wasn't strength, if someone had shown him how to stay instead of vanish. But no one had, and now it was too late. The courtroom broke into murmurs. A few claps, a few tears. Hank didn't speak, didn't move. He just stared at the floor like it might swallow him whole. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. And just like that, the man who tried to erase her was now erased from the outside world. The trial ended, but Linda's story didn't. In the weeks that followed, she kept to herself. No interviews, no podcasts. She wasn't interested in fame. One morning, she walked into the Department of Vital Records. She handed over her birth certificate, her medical records, her court transcript. "I'd like to be reinstated," she told the clerk. The woman looked confused. Reinstated as? Linda smiled, soft, tired but real. As someone who was never supposed to be gone. She signed the form. Linda Walsh. One evening, a knock came at her door. It was Emily. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Emily stepped inside, sat down, and placed an old photo on the table. Her as a little girl on Linda's lap. Tears came then. Quiet, warm, overdue. "I miss you every day," Emily whispered. "I never stopped watching over you," Linda said. They held each other like the years had never passed. Like the sea had never taken her. Like justice, however long it takes, can sometimes still lead you home. Later that night, Linda looked at herself in a mirror. Not the lines, not the scars. She looked at her eyes, the same ones Hank once feared. "I'm not who I was," she said softly, "but I'm still here. And sometimes that's enough." The cameras stopped flashing. The courtroom emptied. Justice was done. But Linda Walsh, if she could still be called that, didn't feel triumphant. She sat alone in the back seat of the detective's cruiser, staring out the window at a city that had moved on without her. It had been 12 years since she last walked these streets as herself. 12 years since her name was a name, not a memory. They offered to put her up in a hotel. She refused. Instead, she returned to the small apartment above a bookstore where she had lived as Grace Kingston. The key still worked. The furniture was the same. Even the creaky floorboard near the window hadn't changed. But Linda had. She stood in front of the mirror that night and said her name out loud for the first time in over a decade. Linda Walsh. It sounded foreign, like trying on a coat you used to love but didn't quite fit anymore. The process of reclaiming her legal identity was bureaucratic and cold. She signed affidavits, submitted DNA, presented court documents proving who she was and who she had been forced to stop being. One clerk looked up from the file and asked gently, "You sure you want this name back?" Linda hesitated, then nodded. "It's not for me. It's for the girl who disappeared. She deserves to be counted." Emily visited every Sunday. They didn't talk about the trial. They didn't talk about Hank. They talked about books, about childhood, about things that didn't hurt. And sometimes, just sometimes, they laughed. But there was one Sunday when Emily didn't bring books. She brought silence. She sat across from her mother in the tiny kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold. Her eyes were still, the way they got when something weighed heavy on her. Linda noticed immediately. "Emily, I need to ask you something," Emily said, not looking up. "And I don't want you to protect me from the answer." Linda nodded slowly. "Ask." "That night, on the boat, did he mean to kill you?" Linda's hands didn't shake, but her chest tightened. It wasn't the question that hurt. It was knowing her daughter had carried it for so long. She spoke carefully. "Yes." "You're sure?" "I remember the look in his eyes. I remember that he didn't shout. He didn't try to help. He just watched." Emily closed her eyes. "I had memories of him, you know. Good ones. Ice cream. School trips. Him holding my hand when I was sick. And for so long, I blamed myself for forgetting you." Linda reached across the table, touching her daughter's wrist. "Don't. You were a child. You weren't supposed to carry any of this." "But I did." Emily's voice cracked, a quiet fracture in her strength. "And I don't know how to forgive him, or how to stop needing to." Linda let the silence sit for a moment, let it breathe between them. "Surviving is messy," she said softly. "You think it means escape, or revenge, or closure. But most days, it just means waking up and trying again, and hoping that someday the weight shifts." "Has it shifted for you?" Emily asked. Linda smiled faintly. "Some days. And some days, I still wake up hearing waves." Emily reached in her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the corners. It was a drawing. Crayon. A stick figure family of 3. A house. A son. A dog. "I made this in 2nd grade," she said. "The school had a family day. I told the teacher I didn't have a mom. But when I got home that night, I drew you anyway." Linda stared at the picture, her throat closed. "Even then," Emily whispered, "some part of me didn't believe you were really gone. They didn't fix everything that day. But something shifted. A wall cracked. A space opened." When Emily left that afternoon, she hugged Linda tighter than usual and whispered, "Don't stop coming back, okay?" And for the first time since Linda had stepped out of the shadows, she said, "I won't." It wasn't easy. Trust was a wall, and bricks take time. But with each visit, a small crack in that wall softened. And when Emily once said, "Mom," instead of Linda, Linda cried for the first time in years. Linda had spent a decade fueled by rage. Revenge gave her reason. Now it was gone, and in its place was silence. She took long walks by the water, sometimes along the docks where the red ember once floated. She thought of Hank less with hatred now, and more like a closed book, a book she wouldn't reread. One afternoon, she took down the only picture left from the old life. Her, Hank, and baby Emily at the zoo. She stared at it for a long time, then tore it in half, saving only the side with her and her daughter. She framed it, placed it on the shelf above her bed. "This part was always real," she whispered. "The rest was the lie." In her journal, Linda wrote a letter to Hank. She never mailed it. She never would. But she needed to write it anyway. "You didn't just try to kill me. You tried to erase me. But I found a way back, not because I was stronger than you, but because I refused to stay small for your comfort. You gave me a grave. I gave myself a second chance." She closed the notebook and burned the page. When she stood in line at the DMV to renew her ID, the clerk asked her name. This time, she smiled without hesitation. Linda Grace Walsh. She had learned that she could be both. The woman she once was, and the woman who survived. Linda never expected anyone to write to her. Not after everything had ended. Not after the courts, the cameras, the confessions. She had slipped quietly back into a life of routines. Grocery shopping at 7 a.m. Coffee at the same window seat every Thursday. Weekly dinners with Emily. But 3 weeks after the verdict, she found a letter in her mailbox. No return address. Just her name, her real name, written in careful, slanted ink. Inside, a single page. Dear Linda, I watched your trial from a motel room in Des Moines. I cried through most of it, not because I knew you, but because you lived, and I didn't. Linda froze. Her hands trembled, but she kept reading. His name was Stephen. He wasn't famous. Not like Hank, but he had that same look, the kind that makes you trust first and question later. He nearly killed me in 2013, held me under the water in a lake until I blacked out. I survived, but I never told anyone. I told myself it wasn't real, that I was crazy, that no one would believe me anyway. Linda sat down at the kitchen table, heart pounding. But then I saw you, standing in that courtroom, saying the words I never could. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. Permission. To believe what happened. To speak it. To stop hiding. At the bottom was a name. Claire M. No phone number. No request for reply. Just a final sentence. You weren't just fighting for yourself, Linda. You were fighting for all of us. Linda folded the letter with care. She placed it inside a small wooden box beside her bed, the same box that held a childhood drawing from Emily and a photo from her old life. That night, she stared at the ceiling and whispered, "You're not invisible anymore, Claire. None of us are.